Imagine this. You're driving to work, thinking about coffee and deadlines, and an hour later, you're in handcuffs for a crime you didn't commit. The judge looks at you like you've already confessed, and the only thing keeping you afloat is a lawyer who turns the courtroom into a battlefield. But what happened next? No one saw it coming. Let's start from the beginning. Derek Lawson, 29, had always been the poster child for playing by the rules. Born and raised in a modest neighborhood in Chicago, he grew up with two strict but loving parents who instilled in him the importance of integrity and hard work. For Derek, following the law wasn't just a principle, it was second nature. He had a stable job as a software engineer, a clean record, and a reputation as the fixer among his friends. So, the last place he ever expected to find himself was in the back of a police cruiser, accused of a crime he didn't commit. It all started one Tuesday morning. Derek was cruising through the city in his friend Marcus's car, a sleek black sedan that Marcus had lent him for the week while his own car was in the shop. Derek had no idea that borrowing a friend's car would land him in the middle of a nightmare. Out of nowhere, red and blue lights flashed in his rearview mirror. Okay, no big deal, he thought, pulling over. His heart pounded, but he told himself it was just a routine check. The officer approached, tapping on the window with that smug authority that immediately put Derek on edge. License and registration, the officer demanded, barely glancing at Derek as he handed over the documents. Sure, officer, Derek replied, keeping his tone calm. Is there a problem? The officer didn't answer. Instead, he returned to his cruiser, leaving Derek sitting there stewing in confusion. Minutes later, the cop came back with backup, 2 more officers, and things went south fast. Step out of the vehicle. Sir, the officer barked. What's going on? Derek asked, now genuinely alarmed. This car matches the description of a stolen vehicle, the cop said, his tone cold and final, as if Derek's guilt was already decided. Derek blinked in disbelief. Stolen? That's impossible. This is my friend's car. I have his permission. Save it, the cop interrupted, grabbing Derek's arm and slapping handcuffs on him. The humiliation was instant and sharp, like a punch to the gut. People on the sidewalk slowed down to gawk, their stares cutting into Derek like daggers. Weeks later, Derek stood in a courtroom that felt more like an arena. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. He wore his best suit, a charcoal gray number that his mom had bought him years ago, and tried to appear confident, though his stomach churned with anxiety. The judge, Edward Mallory, was a middle-aged man with thinning hair and a permanent scowl etched into his face. Mallory had a reputation for being tough on defendants, and it didn't take long for Derek to realize he was about to become just another statistic in this man's courtroom. Well, Mr. Lawson, Judge Mallory began, peering over his glasses. His voice dripped with condescension. First time in my court? I hope you're enjoying the experience. The courtroom chuckled, and Derek felt his cheeks flush with anger. But he bit his tongue. He knew better than to lose his cool here. Mallory wasn't done. He picked up a folder and waved it theatrically. So, you're telling me you had no idea this car was stolen? How charming. Maybe your lawyer will juggle for us next. The crowd laughed again, and Derek's fists clenched at his sides. His lawyer wasn't even in the room, delayed by another case. And here he was, alone, the butt of everyone's joke. Derek's mind raced. How had it come to this? How had the system he'd always believed in turned against him so ruthlessly? The next day, the courtroom was buzzing like a hive of nervous bees. Derek sat at the defendant's table, his hands clasped tightly together, trying not to show how close he was to losing it. He had no idea who his replacement lawyer would be, and honestly, his faith in the system was already hanging by a thread. Then the door opened, and the energy in the room shifted, like a cold wind blowing through a summer day. In walked Olivia Grant, and let me tell you, she owned the room from the second her heels clicked against the marble floor. She was 33, sharp as a tack, and dressed to kill in a navy blue power suit that screamed, "Mess with me and you'll regret it." Her gaze swept across the courtroom like a spotlight, and for a moment, it felt like even Judge Mallory forgot how to breathe. Derek couldn't help but stare. Who was this woman? And more importantly, how had she ended up in his corner? He didn't have time to wonder because Olivia was already moving, like she'd been planning this showdown for weeks. She dropped her leather briefcase onto the defense table with a satisfying thud, pulled out a folder thicker than a phone book, and gave Derek a quick nod. "Don't worry," she whispered. "I've got this." From the moment Olivia spoke, it was clear she wasn't just defending Derek. She was on a mission. "Your Honor," she began, her voice cutting through the chatter like a knife. "We're going to need to address some glaring issues with this case, starting with the fact that the charges against my client are based on a tissue of lies." The courtroom gasped. Judge Mallory leaned back in his chair, his lips twitching into a smirk. "Ms. Grant, I suggest you tread carefully. I run my courtroom based on facts, not emotions." Olivia folded her arms, tilting her head slightly like a teacher catching a student cheating. "Facts? That's interesting, because the so-called facts here don't hold up under the slightest scrutiny. Or is this court now operating on assumptions and convenience?" The courtroom went dead silent. Mallory's face turned an alarming shade of red. But Olivia wasn't done. She flipped through her folder with the precision of a surgeon. "Let's start with the arrest," she said, pacing slowly. "The police claimed the vehicle was reported stolen. Yet the owner, my client's friend, never filed such a report. Funny, isn't it? Almost as if someone jumped to conclusions." She turned to the audience, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "And then we have the interrogation. Hours of questioning without a lawyer present. My client was treated like a suspect before anyone bothered to gather evidence." Mallory tried to interject, but Olivia silenced him with a raised hand. "I'm not finished. Your Honor, let's talk about the footage from the arrest." She held up a stack of papers. The dash cam conveniently malfunctioned, yet multiple witnesses recorded the incident on their phones. Funny how technology seems to fail at the most opportune moments. For the first time in weeks, Derek felt something he hadn't dared to hope for: relief. Olivia was tearing the prosecution's case apart piece by piece, and she made it look easy. By the end of the trial, the courtroom was no longer Judge Mallory's domain. It was Olivia Grant's. Her cross-examinations left the prosecution stumbling. Her arguments dismantled their case, and her unflinching confidence turned the tide. "The court finds the charges against Mr. Lawson dismissed," Mallory finally said, his voice devoid of its earlier arrogance. Derek's heart nearly stopped. It was over. He was free. As they left the courthouse, Derek turned to Olivia, his voice choked with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you." Olivia's expression remained calm, but her eyes softened. "You don't need to. Just remember, this isn't just about you. It's about standing up to a system that's broken." Derek nodded, her words heavy with meaning. This victory wasn't just his. It was a crack in the armor of a system that had let too many people down. For now, it was enough.